Hi, welcome everyone to another episode of Let's Talk Special Economic Zones. I'm your host, Ainsley Brown, and in today's episode, we're going to talk about negotiating economic security agreements. And I must say that this is going to be, to my mind, a very interesting new area emerging within the context of not just special economic zones, but the world in general, given where we are in terms of geopolitics and geoeconomics. And in terms of the zone context, this is going to be relevant for investors, um, operators of zones, folks that actually operate within the zones, and governments right across the board. And by economic security agreements, I mean that there is an element of economic security built into the zone or the zone regime, so that the the government can secure its economy in the sense of creating not just greater jobs, but something that is important to them. It could be linked to energy, for example, energy security, could be linked to food security. And these agreements, some of which will be side agreements, meaning that the zones already exist up and running, and there's some sort of renegotiation or attack on or add on to an existing agreement. Or going forward, some might design it in to the very fabric of the regime. So you're going to increasingly see that. And zones, I always do this in every episode so that we're all on the same page. Zones are geographically designated area done so by some law, decree, or regulation within a country that says this area is separate and different than the rest of the economy, and it's intended to attract investment, both local and foreign. And the laws may be radically different, or it may differ in some contexts, particularly around trade, where certain things may be suspended, but not necessarily totally not applicable, but suspended. So you may not be able to collect duties on raw materials that go in. But if you try to sell them into the rest of the economy, then duties apply at that time. So in many ways, the duties are postponed. They're put on pause temporarily, and then depending on what the next decision is, they may or may not apply, right? So in terms of these what I'm calling economic security agreements, a country will determine what its vulnerabilities are. For example, if it's energy, in terms of fuel, they may negotiate a situation where they're attracting people that store oil, and maybe if a natural disaster happens, then there's some level of access to that oil. Or maybe even it may not be a natural disaster. It may be that in exchange for having the ability to store your oil or your gasoline or whatever else there is some level of access granted, probably at some preferential rate, to the country. So there's some level of benefit there. Likewise, when it comes to food and food security, you may invite investors to come in, not just to store this time, but that's one model, but to actually grow, and in exchange, you could say you give up certain levels of land, whether on a long-term lease or actually, sale at a low rate. And in exchange, the person has to develop this acreage of land, and some of that produce has to be destined for the local economy at a lower price, etc. Or it could be other key inputs or critical inputs into your production, whether it be parts, or it could be some sort of chemical that is used in multiple industries. So a country would assess what its vulnerabilities are and then try to attract that and typically setting up a zone or zone regime to attract that. So these agreements, these economic security agreements, are going to become critical. It could even be to the case of food, in the sense of whenever there's a crisis like COVID, for example, that the zones and the storage of food items or certain other items become a strategic reserve, right? And the government sets up some sort of program with those folks where they could be compensated on a very marginal level, over months or over years, marginal level. And it's almost like an insurance policy whereby the government then gets access to those materials for their citizens. So there are multiple ways to configure this, but I think it's going to become increasingly, given the geopolitical climate that we're in, an increasingly important area within the ambit of zones. So that's it for today. If you liked what I did, please leave me a comment. If you want to see me do a particular episode, just leave me a comment down below and I'll get right back to you. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. That's it for now. Bye for now.